Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about using artificial intelligence to contextualize your company's data. The goal is to gain more insight, more competitive edge from that data. We'll also take a look at where the AI sector is headed in the years ahead. Pretty interesting stuff. To discuss that, I'm joined by a major industry expert. With me is Babak Hodjat, Chief Technical Officer of Artificial Intelligence at Cognizant. Babak, absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I do like your job title. You're not just a CTO, you're the CTO of artificial intelligence. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, the only AIs work for me right now.
Well, it seems like a very 2023 job title, so I congratulate you on that.
Oh, well.
I normally ask companies, executives from companies to give sort of a brief, elevator pitch of what they do, and we can get to that. But I think you yourself have had a really interesting career. I don't want to make you rehash the whole thing, but is there kind of a nutshell thing of some of the stuff you've done before we get going?
I've been in AI since the late 80s. I have a PhD in AI. I've started 3 companies in AI in a past life. I was the main inventor of the natural language technology behind Siri, which isn't to say much today. Siri isn't the top of the line as far as conversational systems are going. I started Sentient Technologies. We spun off the first ever AI-based hedge fund. It's awesome to be living in this time right now with AI being where it is and garnering the attention that it is.
Right. No, there's been an amazing surge in interest, obviously, this year, ever since ChatGPT debuted in November 2022. All right, well then that's fascinating, and that's grounds for a lot of conversation, but I want to make sure we touch on Cognizant before we really begin. I know a lot of people are very aware of Cognizant, a very well-known company, but can you give, for those who aren't as aware, can you give the short nutshell of what Cognizant does?
Cognizant is a services company, a very large one. We have more than 350,000 associates around the world. We're considered an extension of many of our clients, and we help them on their mainly on their digitization journey. And now that's actually our job is to help them on their AI enablement journey.
Okay, great, good. So I think it's there's an idea. I believe you may have written this, or I read this maybe in the official Cognizant press release. It's about contextualizing data effectively while aligning with specific business goals and using AI as a tool in that. I want to make sure before we even truly dive in, what does it mean to contextualize data effectively while aligning with specific business goals? Let's just define that idea.
Yeah, it's easy to think that a generative AI model like ChatGPT can answer any questions, and it can. But it answers the questions without knowing anything about your business, not knowing anything about the KPI, usually plural KPIs that you care about. And so bringing that in is engineering, and it's work, and making it act and behave responsibly is also a lot of work. And so that is what we try to capture with those sentences that we just mentioned. How do you orchestrate generative AI nodes that are so powerful alongside the data that's running through your business and capturing the context of the decisions that you make in order to ultimately affect the KPI that you care about?
Well, that makes perfect sense. Well, then that enables me to ask a follow-up question that I'll use one of the key terms of this year, large language model. Every conversation at this point has to use generative AI and the phrase large language model. So here's my question with LLM. Is part of that process of having the right LLM, and you got to tweak it, it's got to be proprietary, or not necessarily?
The choice of LLM is very, very important, even though all large language models are more or less trained on, let's say, a snapshot of the internet, and they're trained as foundational models to be able to answer any question. First of all, they're fine-tuned to various different domains, so that is an important choice. Also, there's this duality where there's 2 trends. There are commercial, larger, currently state-of-the-art models out there like GPT-4 or Claude and others that you can pick, but they're commercial and they're hosted by third parties. And then there are open source models that you can download and entirely run on premise. And for example, data security is a big consideration as to which way you want to go.
Well, all right, you talk about training the LLMs on a snapshot of the internet. I'm also thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a growth of, or maybe they already exist, of large language models that have been trained, say, for healthcare or for finance, and they've really been trained with a lot of maybe anonymized healthcare data. So it's a large language model made for a healthcare application. Is that springing into use, or is that already in use?
So basically what happens is that we do train the foundational model is trained on everything,
Right.
everything language, because the
Yes.
larger the corpus, the more powerful these systems are. And then they're fine-tuned. And fine-tuning doesn't mean it's learning new things. It's basically being biased to answer questions in certain ways. So prefer certain answers over the others. And that bias pushes them to be able to answer questions more from, for example, a healthcare perspective, if we do that training in that manner. And so that there's two steps generally we're talking about: picking a foundational model and then kind of skewing it a little bit towards a domain that we prefer. And of course, if the use case is within healthcare, we would prefer to use a language model, a large language model that has been fine-tuned on healthcare data.
Mhm. All right, so you've talked about contextualizing data effectively while aligning with specific business objectives. What are the challenges to this process that businesses should be aware of? Like we want to do that, but why is it going to be hard, and how can we overcome that challenge?
Um, the challenges are usually very the challenges that we typically face with bringing in AI models into businesses. It starts with the data itself. We have captured, as different industries have captured, the flow of data that run through them. This data needs prepping up, cleaning up. There's a mix of unstructured and structured data in there, and we want to derive various different information from that. So we actually spend a lot of time on that. And of course, generative AI helps us with that as well. How do you take and augment data? How do you take data that's coming, like, let's say you're a large company that has acquired a whole bunch of other companies, and the
Mhm.
data that's being sourced is coming from different sources. So the very same attribute might have, 7 categories here and 5 categories there, and you want to harmonize it. That's a big task. A lot of work goes into that. It's not sexy, but it's
Right,
work that has to be done.
right.
And so that's part of it. It's just getting the data in a form and flow that actually helps us then derive decisions off of that. So we need to be able to predict what's going to happen if we make a certain decision, because then that directs us as to what kind of decision we want to make. We also need to get a sense of how certain or uncertain we are on the recommendations of the system, something that's often neglected. We need the AI system basically to tell us, hey, I'm in uncharted territory right now for this particular decision in this context. So I'll give you a recommendation, but I'm not as confident in it. And so maybe that's where a human oversight is important. All the way to designing the UX and designing the interactions that allow us to effectively and productively and responsibly make these decisions. So I can't point at a single place where there's a challenge. The entire thing is a challenging process. It's not turnkey for sure.
Right. And it really struck me as I was listening to you speak that it doesn't sound like companies can really do this in house. I mean, there's certain things like we want to, improve our data analytics practice, so we can follow like data analytics, 5 data analytics practices, best practices, and they can actually get more from their analytics application. From listening to you speak, it doesn't sound like companies would really be able to handle this task in house.
Yeah, I mean, the company's running a business, and
Right.
the data is flowing through, and there is an infrastructure that allows it to continue business and work. And we have to overlay this AI enablement on top of that as this is happening, and to bring in these AI principles. So while it might sound like these AI models can do everything, and when you interact with ChatGPT, it gives you that impression. The fact is that to make them work and effective and productive and responsible takes a lot of engineering. So you're very right. Companies do need help, and every company's workflow and decision flow is different. So there's not a one-size-fits-all or a template that we can just bring in and just plop in and be done. Now, there are use cases for generative AI that are turnkey, and we do provide those as well. In fact, a lot of the work that we do for companies have to do with things like, oh, we want to do machine translation, or we want to have our coding developers more productive or better quality, so we want to bring in better test cases. So provisioning that and have it be observable so the company knows which kind of large language model is being used and how, and it's all being logged. All of that is also work, but it's more turnkey than, the specific decision-making and strategic KPI that a company has, and they want to stand out against their competition. I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of off-the-shelf and routine stuff we can do with generative AI, but you want to stand out from your competition by making use of generative AI effectively.
Interesting. Well, I want to get to Cognizant. I first want to cover one issue that you brought up. I think it's really fascinating. Is that I may have heard you or misheard you, but I thought at one point you were suggesting that generative AI and a generative AI application can itself be used to train large language models, which of course a large language model is a foundation of a generative AI application. So it's almost like the system can be used to train itself, if that question makes any sense at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, AI designing AI training AI is a discipline. It is a branch of AI, and it does apply to generative AI as well. There are pitfalls. You want to be careful with how you do that. And there are some very interesting, mainly research sort of tracks where we're looking into how you can actually make use of generative AI to distill data that is generated by other generative AI models into a training set being trained for the next version of generative AI models.
Right,
so
right.
Yes, there is a track to do that, and it's fascinating.
Well, actually, I guess now that I think of it, I've heard the idea that, ChatGPT 7 will write ChatGPT 8, et cetera. I mean, if 14 will write 15. And so I don't know, is that will that
I like
actually...
the way we're skipping over 5 altogether. Yeah, I mean, that is the track. I mean, the scale at which, so first of all, we're seeing that starting from these simple first principles of, predicting what's the next token in a string of tokens and training it on a lot of data and scaling it, making it larger and larger, makes it more powerful. And so if we're on that trajectory of scaling it, we have to scale it automatically some way, somehow. And so, utilizing AI to help us with AI does make a lot of sense. When you think about it, we've been doing this forever with technology. Like, we use technology to create new technology all the time. And so it's no different than that in that respect.
Well, let's drill down to Cognizant. I mean, how is Cognizant, and you've talked about it a bit, but let's make sure we really cover it. How is Cognizant addressing the AI and data needs of its clients? What might be some sample use cases of Cognizant?
Right. So I mentioned a few where when we engage with a client, there is this expectation, given our interactions with ChatGPT, for example, that there are certain things that we can do right out of the box. They're low-hanging fruit as far as productivity is concerned, especially developer productivity, quality of code, and translation and so forth. So there's a bunch of use cases there. But where we actually strive in engaging with our clients is to identify the most critical decision making that they have and the KPI that they are targeting, and work back from there. And so what we've done is we've created a number of templates for these types of use cases. And we have a platform called Neuro AI, where we can make use of these pre-existing templates or actually build new systems end-to-end that start from data all the way to a decision-making UI that might be augmented with a sort of a ChatGPT-like interface for different use cases. And you name it, There are many use cases there, from augmenting a call center operator all the way to coming up with loan criteria and mortgage pricing to actual pricing and optimization of pricing, all the way to things like manufacturing, supply chain, you name it. There are many use cases here. Some of them have KPI that have to do with, for example, ESG and climate. So you bring in those aspects as well. It's very fast for us to actually create these use cases. It's amazing. My world record is 45 minutes, believe it or not, where
Wow.
we
Okay.
had a lunch meeting with a client, and then I had 45 minutes. I actually used a generative AI model to generate synthetic data based on what my understanding was. And I also consulted generative AI on what the outline of the data that it expected to be running through the model. And then I built an end-to-end system where they could actually query it and make decisions. So we often get in front of clients and show them an end-to-end use case that they typically haven't really thought of, that targets their KPI, even in the first meeting. And so that's the power of Neuro AI, the platform that we've created here.
It's pretty amazing. And the 45-minute figure is pretty stunning. It seems like one of the challenges facing Cognizant and or the business that might work for is that you're helping them with their artificial intelligence journey, but of course that's not a separate journey from the rest of the business. It's so intermingled with the business. It's not like the company is hiring someone to do their trucking and the trucking is handled, but it doesn't really address the rest of the business. When you're doing what you're doing, it sounds like it's really making a major decision on how they're going to run their business itself, the core of the business.
That's exactly right. I mean, we look at it holistically. Under Ravi, our CEO's guidance, we advocate pervasive and responsible use of generative AI. So we're coming in saying, don't be scared of this technology. Let's endorse it. Let's bring it in and make us your partner in bringing it in. And absolutely, we want to target the KPI. I mean, this is analogous to the transistor revolution and the PC revolution, which is hugely disruptive. The main difference is it's unfolding much faster and the barrier to entry is much lower. To set up these generative AI-based agents and orchestrate them, all you need to know is your native tongue. Just to explain to the generative AI what its persona is and what you expect it to do. And so if large businesses do not think about how to disrupt their own business flow, others will do that for them. This is that level. I mean, I think that's what this tsunami of demand that we're seeing on adopting and bringing in generative AI is hard to stay in front of, I can tell you.
Indeed, and I guess that brings us to the trillion-dollar question, which is the future of artificial intelligence in enterprise settings. Something you said about the transistor and the PC revolution, that you compared AI to that, and it makes perfect sense. I guess the one thing I would say is that artificial intelligence is the first technology that can grow by itself. It can develop by itself without human intervention. If the algorithm is set, it can iterate and learn. Unlike the PC, of course, it only actually goes downhill once it's booted up on that first day. So I don't know, with the future of AI and its ability to self-evolve, what do you see in terms of enterprise use in the years ahead?
Yeah, I would caution to say that ability, that potential is there, as you mentioned, but that's still in research, and we're still a bit far from that completely self-contained and autonomous improving system. One of the main issues is these models are so large and it takes so long and so much data to actually train them, that we use a lot of terminology here on machine learning and, zero shot, few shot, blah, 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 that implies that these things learn as they go, but they don't. So let's not get carried away on that aspect. These are fixed, pre-trained, like the PT and GPT stands for pre-trained, and they remain static. So we do need to solve a whole bunch of problems before that aspect is completely autonomous, and maybe some major breakthroughs in the technology are in order. Having said this, coming back to your question of what is the future, I do think that as decision making is disrupted by bringing in generative AI and other forms of AI and decision making into the flow, I think we will see better quality decisions, and we will see a disruption in the way that enterprises are even set up, because we set up and we organize around, let's face it, our human limitations in decision making. We're, for example, not very good at multi-outcome, multi-objective decision-making. And so we set up our organizations so that one unit is only looking at cost, let's say like the finance department, and then we have one that's only a cost center, or is looking at revenue, and we have this other like legal department and so forth. But if you can actually manage all of those at the same time and find the right balance between them, in that decision workflow, that might call for us rethinking the way we set up our organizations as a whole. Don't ask me what that would look like. I don't know, but I just think that there is that potential for sure.
I'm glad you clarified the idea of the AI applications not being self-evolving exactly. It's a future research there. It presumably will happen, but it's not at the moment. They're static. I guess from my own education, I thought there was more self-evolution going on already, but not necessarily. Like I think about an algorithm, of course, the algorithm knows that I shop for a lawnmower, so it's going to, suddenly start feeding me lawnmower ads. But of course, that's part of its static nature. I mean, so really, as of this point, the AI that we're using in the enterprise is actually static. It's not really this evolving autonomous thing.
The way it keeps up with the data that's coming in a changing world is by virtue of engineering it alongside models and data that can make it keep up to date. So I'll give you an example. If we treat these static models as knowledge workers, then we can put them in a framing where we say, look, here's a search engine, go check the search engine for the latest data, and then distill an answer for me. And that way, it's kept up to date. If I don't do that and just say, answer this question, it's not going to know what happened since its training. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important for us to remember that these are statically trained nodes, but in the larger picture, we can engineer them to keep up to date as they go. And so we might actually still be relying on what, as of 9 months ago, is traditional ML models that can be trained very quickly as the data comes in and optimized very quickly as the data comes in, and then allow our generative models, these larger language models, to make calls to these AI models and get up-to-date information and respond. So that it's very much engineered right now. And these models are not, the model itself is not learning as it goes.
I'm kind of relieved to hear that. It sounds like we all might have a job for a little while since they're not learning without us. I'm kind of relieved to hear that. Well, then the last question then is, when is there a time frame, 18 months, 4 years, when there is a greater sense of self-evolution within an AI deployment?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that the biggest breakthrough here is that we've a proof of existence. We did not think that we could develop an entity that abstracts the world the way humans abstract the world and understands language the way we understand language. Mm-hmm. That's the big breakthrough. To make that now be able to learn as it goes might require a completely different approach. So we know that it is possible to get to this endpoint, but can we get to it in a manner that's more incremental and it's training as it goes, like us humans seem to do? That might actually take some breakthroughs in the technology. So that might happen in a few months. It might happen later. I can tell you there is some bad news here, which is that AI is now very myopically focused on a very certain architecture, trained in a very certain way and scaled in a very certain way, which means that we're kind of not looking elsewhere as much as we should, I think. And I think there's a disruptive change that is in order for us to be able to fix this shortcoming.
I, I don't want to take too much of your time. Could you elaborate a little bit on the last point? I'm not totally sure I understand that.
So AI use like machine learning, reinforcement learning was all about keeping up with the changing environment and changing your worldview and being able to operate in that. Currently, though, AI is a very specific architecture. It's a very specific way of training things. When we say AI, it's all now synonymous to generative AI, and not any generative AI, but GPT-style generative AI. And so most of the research, most of the investment and R&D is going to just that and making that better incrementally. Whereas I think we need this, we need to bring in from the older AI disciplines outside of that in order to solve some of these fundamental issues, such as online learning.
That makes perfect sense. Babak, I think you said it. Fascinating stuff. It's going to be really, really interesting to follow this sector in the years ahead. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, and I hope you come back and talk with us again sometime.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.